My sister vanished after dropping her 4 kids on my doorstep. For 10 years, I raised them as my own, my heart aching with every sacrifice. Then, in a courtroom, she pointed at me and told the judge I was a kidnapper. My name is Shirley Coleman. I'm 55 years old, and I never imagined I'd be sitting in a Cleveland courtroom, listening to my own sister, Lorraine, accuse me of kidnapping her 4 children. Kidnapping. The word echoed in the silent room, a vicious, calculated lie. 10 years. 10 years since she'd dropped them on my doorstep on a stormy night, swore she'd just be an hour, and then vanished from their lives like a ghost. But as I looked at her across the aisle, dressed in a designer suit and feigning tears, I knew this wasn't about the kids. It was never about the kids. It was about the sturdy brick house our parents left behind, a home now valued at $425,000. She thought she could just waltz back in, point a finger, and take everything. But our parents, they knew her. They knew her ambition and her selfishness better than anyone. That's why they left a will with one very specific clause, a line of fine print I was clutching in an envelope on my lap. A clause she never, ever bothered to read. The fight was just getting started, and she had no idea what was coming. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something. What would you do if the one person in the world you should be able to trust, your own sister, tried to destroy your life for money? Share your thoughts in the comments, because I truly want to know how you would handle a betrayal like this. Every eye in that courtroom was on me, waiting. But my mind wasn't there anymore. It was being pulled back, a decade earlier, to the sound of frantic knocking against the roar of a Cleveland thunderstorm. The knocking was frantic, almost lost in the howl of the late October wind whipping off Lake Erie. I remember I was curled up on the couch with a book, the house quiet and warm around me. When I opened the door, the storm seemed to rush inside. And there was Lorraine, my sister, looking like a ghost. Rain plastered her hair to her pale face, her eyes wide and darting around nervously, not at me, but at the shadows on the street behind her. Huddled behind her legs were her 4 children. Little Matthew, only 8, was trying to look brave, his thin jacket soaked through. Angela, 6, clutched a threadbare stuffed dog, its one remaining button eye staring blankly. Wendy, 4, was shivering, her tiny sneakers untied, and baby Kevin was just a whimpering bundle in a cheap stroller. Shirley, thank God, Lorraine's voice was a harsh whisper. I need you to watch them. Just for an hour. I swear, Shirley, just 1 hour. I have to sort something out. Before I could even form a question, she shoved a flimsy diaper bag into my arms, the strap cold and wet against my skin. She didn't hug the children. She didn't even look at them. She just turned and ran back to her beat-up sedan, the engine roaring to life with a protesting screech. And then she was gone, her red taillights swallowed by the sheets of rain. I stood there, frozen in the doorway, with 4 pairs of terrified eyes looking up at me. The silence was broken by Matt's small voice. Aunt Shirley. Where did Mom go? I ushered them inside, my heart hammering against my ribs. 1 hour, she had said. Just 1 hour. 1 hour turned into a night turned into a weekend of unanswered calls, each one going to a voicemail that was eventually full, and then, finally, to a dead, disconnected tone. Tucked deep inside the diaper bag, I found a crumpled note on a napkin. It just said, I'll be back for them. Thanks. There was no date. No sign of when. That was 10 years ago. My life, as I knew it, ended that weekend. I was 45, a high school librarian. I had a plan, work for 10 more years, retire early, maybe even take that trip to see the vineyards of Tuscany I'd always dreamed of. That plan evaporated. My retirement savings, once a source of comfort, were drained within the first 2 years on daycare, dentists, and the endless need for new shoes. My quiet, 2-bedroom bungalow on the west side of Cleveland, once my sanctuary, became a chaotic, wonderful, noisy home base for 4 growing children. The dream of Italy was replaced by the urgent reality of a leaking water heater. My evenings of quiet reading became homework sessions at the kitchen table, explaining fractions and American history. I picked up extra shifts, organized fundraisers for the library, did anything I could to stretch my modest salary to cover 5 people instead of 1. There were nights I'd collapse into bed, so bone-tired I could barely move, the weight of it all pressing down on me. But then, morning would come, and I'd see their faces. I was the only constant they had, the only anchor in their world. I wasn't just their aunt anymore. I had to become their fortress. And in that fortress we built together, something beautiful and fierce grew. Loyalty. It wasn't something I ever asked for, but they gave it to me completely. Matt, now a young man of 18, became the quiet guardian of our home. He took a part-time job bagging groceries, not for pocket money, but to help with the utility bills, insisting it was his share. He learned how to fix a leaky faucet from a YouTube video and was the one who always reminded me when my car needed an oil change. He never had a normal childhood, and yet he never complained. Angela, my artistic, sensitive 16-year-old, filled our walls with her love. She drew countless portraits of our family, always with me in the center, her lines capturing a warmth I never knew I possessed. Then there's Wendy, 14, with a spirit as fiery as her red hair. I once overheard another kid at school ask why she didn't live with her real mom. Wendy didn't miss a beat. "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice sharp. "I do live with my real mom." And little Kevin, now 12, has no memory of anyone else. He simply calls me Mom. It's not a mistake, not a slip of the tongue. It's just who I am to him. They rarely spoke of Lorraine. The space she had left in their lives wasn't a gaping wound anymore. It was a scar that had been covered over by a decade of bedtime stories, home-cooked meals, and unwavering presence. They were my children. Our world was chaotic, but it was whole. We thought we had weathered the worst of the storm. We had no idea a different kind of tempest was gathering, set in motion 2 years ago by the reading of my parents' will. When my parents passed away peacefully within 6 months of each other 2 years ago, the grief was a heavy blanket. For a brief moment, I thought their passing might be the one thing that could bring Lorraine back into our orbit, but all I got was a text message that said, "Sorry for your loss. Not our loss, your loss." A week later, I sat alone in a stuffy lawyer's office for the reading of their will. I expected it to be simple, a straightforward 50-over-50 split of their modest assets. That's what's fair, right? That's what parents do. But my parents knew their daughters. The lawyer, a kind man named Mr. Gable, cleared his throat and read a passage that made the air in the room stand still. Regarding the family home at 124 Elm Street, he read, his voice steady, currently valued at $425,000. "It is our final and binding wish that it not be divided or sold. Instead, full and sole ownership shall be granted to whichever of our daughters demonstrates, through their actions, a stable and continuous commitment to the care and legacy of our family." I was speechless. It wasn't a slight against Lorraine. It was a safety net for the children. My parents, even from the great beyond, were making sure Matt, Angela, Wendy, and Kevin would always have a roof over their heads. It was their final act of love. A copy of the will was sent to Lorraine's last known address in Chicago. At the time, I just filed my copy away, grateful but not fully understanding its power. I didn't realize that to my sister, those words weren't a testament. They were a challenge. It wasn't a will, it was a treasure map, and she was about to come back to claim her prize. For nearly 2 years after the will was read, there was nothing. Life settled back into our comfortable, chaotic routine of school, work, and family dinners. The letter and its strange clause faded into the background, a strange detail in a past I tried not to dwell on. I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, Lorraine had accepted her choices and moved on. I was a fool. The first shot wasn't a phone call or a knock at the door. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope that arrived in the mail, bearing the name of a high-powered law firm from downtown Chicago. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter was full of cold, legal jargon, words like petition, reunification, and parental rights. It claimed that my sister, Lorraine Pierce, after a decade of personal struggle, was now financially and emotionally stable and wished to reestablish a relationship with her estranged children. estranged. As if she were the victim. As if she hadn't been the one to vanish without a trace. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, crept up my spine. This had nothing to do with motherhood. This was about the will. This was her first move. I immediately called the number on the letterhead, and to my shock, Lorraine herself answered, her voice no longer the desperate whisper I remembered, but smooth, confident, and utterly chilling. "Lorraine? What is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "It's time, Shirley," she said coolly. "I'm coming to bring my children home." Before I could argue, she added, "The law is on my side. I'll see you soon," and the line went dead. I was left with a dead phone in my hand, the pit in my stomach telling me this was just the beginning. I had no idea her war wouldn't start in a courtroom, but in a place where the entire town would be watching. Her first move came a week later, on a crisp Friday night under the bright stadium lights of the Northwood High football game. It was a perfect slice of Americana. The whole town was there, the air smelled like popcorn and cut grass, and the marching band was playing. Matt was on the field, a senior on the varsity team, and I was in the bleachers with Darlene and the other kids, screaming my head off every time he made a tackle. For a moment, everything felt so wonderfully normal. And then I saw her. Lorraine wasn't dressed for a football game. She was wearing a chic trench coat and heels, looking like she'd just stepped out of a magazine, and she was scanning the crowd with a predatory focus. When her eyes landed on us, a slow, deliberate smile spread across her face. She didn't walk, she strode up the bleachers, and her voice, when she spoke, was loud enough for everyone in our section to hear. "Oh, my babies. I've finally found you." The kids froze. She reached for Wendy, who recoiled as if she'd been touched by a snake. Then came the tears, big, theatrical crocodile tears. She turned to the crowd of shocked parents around us. "Can you believe this?" she cried, pointing a trembling finger at me. "My own sister has kept my children from me for a decade. I've been fighting all this time just to see them, and she won't let me. I just want my family back." The whispers started instantly. People stared, their faces filled with pity. For her. I grabbed the kids, my face burning with a rage and humiliation so intense I could barely breathe. "Lorraine, stop it," I hissed. "Not here." We practically fled the stands, the accusing eyes of our community following us all the way to the car. Her work was done. She hadn't come to see her children, she had come to poison the well. We drove home from the game in a thick, painful silence. The kids were humiliated, their faces pale under the streetlights. My own shame from the bleachers had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. Lorraine wanted a war? Fine. I would give her one. But I wouldn't fight it with public scenes and crocodile tears. I would fight it with the truth. The next morning, I called Darlene, my voice flat and steady. "I need a lawyer," I said. She didn't ask questions, she just gave me a name. That weekend, while the kids were at a friend's house, I went up to the attic, a place I hadn't touched in years. I was on a mission. I tore through old boxes, dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from the window. In a shoebox labeled mementos, I found it. The crumpled napkin she'd left 10 years ago. Beneath it was my old flip phone from 2015. I spent an hour finding the right charger, my heart pounding as the screen flickered to life. And there they were. Text messages, saved for a decade. Not a single one asked, "How are the kids?" They said, "Shirley, I'm in a jam, can you wire me $500? Just put $200 in my account, no questions asked." It was a chronicle of her selfishness. When I showed it all to my lawyer, she was pleased but cautious. "This is good," she said, "but not a slam dunk." A seed of doubt began to sprout, but then I remembered. Frank. Lorraine's ex-husband. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but he knew her better than anyone. It was a long shot, but I had to take it. I found his number in an old address book, took a deep breath, and pressed call, having no idea that this one phone call was about to change everything. The weeks leading up to the hearing were a blur of anxious meetings and sleepless nights. The phone call with Frank had been brief, but his last words echoed in my mind. She can't get away with this, surely. I'll be there. And then, the day finally came. Walking into that courtroom felt like stepping into another world. The air was heavy and smelled of old paper and stale coffee. Everything was polished wood and imposing flags, all designed to make you feel small and insignificant. Lorraine and her lawyer were already there, sitting at their table looking confident and unshakable. She was wearing a modest gray dress, her hair pulled back neatly. She was playing the part of a contrite, heartbroken mother, a far cry from the woman who had made that scene at the football game. Her lawyer began. He painted a masterful picture for the judge, a story of a young, desperate mother who had fallen on hard times and made a terrible mistake. He claimed she had spent the last 10 years working tirelessly to rebuild her life so she could be worthy of her children again, only to be denied access by a controlling, gatekeeping sister. He used words like a mother's bond and natural right. I sat there, my hands clenched into fists, listening to this work of fiction. It was so audacious, so completely divorced from reality, that I felt a dizzying sense of unreality. She was erasing my decade of sacrifice with a few well-rehearsed lies. My lawyer presented the napkin note and the text messages, but her attorney simply brushed them aside as the desperate actions of a woman at rock bottom. I could feel the momentum in the room shifting against us. My heart began to pound a frantic, desperate rhythm. It was then my lawyer stood. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm and clear. "We would now like to call the children to the stand." Matt was called first. He walked to the stand with a confidence that made my heart ache with pride, looking so much older than his 18 years. Lorraine's lawyer started with a soft, patronizing tone. "Matt," he began, "tell the court about your mother, Lorraine." Matt looked not at the lawyer, but directly at the judge. "My mother's name is Shirley Coleman," he said, his voice clear and steady. "She's the one who stayed up with me all night when I had the flu. She's the one who taught me how to ride a bike and how to treat people with respect. She helped me with my college applications." He then turned his head slowly and looked right at Lorraine. "The woman you're referring to is the person who abandoned me and my siblings on a doorstep during a thunderstorm. A mother is a verb, sir. It's something you do, not something you just are." A hush fell over the courtroom. Angela was next. She spoke quietly, telling the judge how she used to make 2 Mother's Day cards every year, leaving one by the front door just in case, until she realized the only person who ever deserved it was Shirley. Wendy, my firecracker, was asked if she wanted to live in a big house in Chicago. She just crossed her arms, glared at Lorraine and said, "I'm already in a big house. It's big enough for my family." And finally, little Kevin, so scared his voice was just a whisper, was asked if he knew who Lorraine was. He just shook his head and pointed at me. "That's my mom," he said, tears welling in his eyes. "I want to go home with my mom." Their truth was a tidal wave, and I saw Lorraine's composure finally begin to crumble. Their words, so honest and raw, had shifted the very air in the courtroom. The jury was no longer looking at me with pity, but at Lorraine with a cold, hard judgment. Her polished facade was cracking, the practiced tears gone, replaced by a flicker of genuine panic. But even as my heart swelled with pride, my lawyer leaned in and whispered, "That was powerful, Shirley. But legally, it's not a knockout punch. We need to prove she didn't just leave. We need to prove she never intended to be a mother." A wave of despair began to wash over me. We had won their hearts, but we could still lose the war. It was in that exact moment, as Lorraine's lawyer stood up to dismiss the children's testimony as the product of parental alienation, that the heavy oak doors at the back of the room creaked open. A man I hadn't seen in 9 years stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind him with a soft thud that echoed in the silent room. It was Frank, Lorraine's ex-husband. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper, but his jaw was set with a grim determination. The effect on my sister was instantaneous. She froze, her mouth half open. All the color drained from her face, leaving behind a pasty, terrified mask. "Who is that?" her lawyer hissed, but she couldn't answer. My own lawyer rose to her feet, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Your Honor," she announced, her voice ringing with a sudden, sharp confidence, "the defense calls a surprise witness, Mr. Frank Miller." Frank walked down the aisle, his steady gaze fixed on the judge's bench, ignoring his ex-wife completely. And in his hand, he was holding something small. It was a small, black USB flash drive. It looked so insignificant, an everyday object that held the power to change all of our lives. Lorraine's lawyer immediately jumped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Ambush. We have no knowledge of this witness or this supposed evidence." But the judge, his face a mask of stern curiosity, just raised a hand for silence. "Overruled," he said, his voice sharp. "Mr. Miller, take the stand." Frank was sworn in, his hand steady on the Bible. My lawyer approached him. "Mr. Miller," she asked, "did your ex-wife contact you after she left Cleveland?" Frank nodded, his eyes fixed on the judge. "A few times," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Always when she needed money." My lawyer gestured to the object in his hand. "And what is on that drive?" Frank took a deep breath. "A video," he said. "She sent it to me about 8 years ago. I think she sent it to brag. To rub my nose in the new life she had, the one without us. I kept it. I don't know why. I guess I just felt like someday, the truth would need a witness." "Objection." Lorraine's lawyer shouted again, but the judge silenced him with a glare. "Bailiff, please prepare the evidence for viewing." The entire courtroom held its breath as the bailiff took the small drive and plugged it into the courtroom system. The large monitor on the wall, which had been displaying legal documents, flickered and went dark. I could feel the kids tense up behind me. Lorraine looked like she was about to collapse. The screen remained black for a heart-stopping second, and then an image appeared. It was her. It was Lorraine, 8 years younger, sitting on the deck of a sailboat with the sun sparkling on the water behind her. She was holding a glass of champagne, laughing into the camera she was holding. "Hey, Frankie," she said, her voice slightly slurred and dripping with condescending sweetness. "Thought you'd like to see how the other half lives. No more dirty diapers or PTA meetings for me, thank God." She panned the camera to show the back of a man's head at the helm of the boat before turning it back to her own smiling face. "And the kids?" she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Please. My saintly sister Shirley's got them. She loves playing the martyr. Let her handle the hard work while I build my life." She took a long sip of her champagne, then leaned closer to the camera, her eyes gleaming with a truly chilling malice. "But here's the genius part," she whispered conspiratorially. "I'll let her do all the work, raise them, pay for everything. And then, once Mom and Dad are gone, and that lovely house is on the table, I'll swoop back in. The kids are the perfect excuse to get my hands on it." "They're not children, Frankie," she said, tapping the camera lens. "They're leverage." The video ended. A dead, suffocating silence filled the room, broken only by a single, sharp gasp from a woman on the jury. I felt Angela's body begin to tremble with silent sobs behind me. Lorraine just sat there, staring at the blank screen, her face a ghastly shade of white. Her own words, preserved for 8 years, had just obliterated her. Her lawyer slowly sank into his chair and put his head in his hands. It was over. The judge took off his glasses, polished them slowly, and put them back on. He looked from the blank screen to my sister, and his voice, when he spoke, was low and filled with a cold fury I had not heard before. "Miss Pierce," he said, the words sharp and precise. "In my 20 years on this bench, I have heard many tragic family stories, but rarely have I witnessed such a calculated, manipulative, and deeply cruel act of greed." He picked up the copy of my parents' will. "Your parents wished to grant their home to the daughter who demonstrated a commitment to the family legacy. Miss Coleman," he said, nodding to me, "has shown that commitment through a decade of selfless sacrifice. You, Miss Pierce, have only shown a commitment to yourself, using your own children as pawns in a shameful scheme." He didn't even look at her lawyer. "The petition for custody is denied with extreme prejudice. Full and sole legal guardianship of all 4 children is granted to Miss Shirley Coleman." He wasn't finished. Furthermore, in accordance with the clear intent of the will, this court orders the immediate and full transfer of the property at 124 Elm Street to Miss Coleman. And finally, a 7-year restraining order is issued. You will not come within 500 feet of these children or their guardian. He picked up the gavel, and the sharp crack of it hitting the wood echoed through the silent room. It was the sound of chains breaking. It was the sound of justice. A sob of pure, unadulterated relief escaped my lips, and suddenly, all the kids were hugging me, their tears of fear replaced with tears of joy. Across the aisle, Lorraine just sat there, utterly broken, a statue of her own ruin. We walked out of that courthouse blinking in the bright afternoon sun, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally take a full breath. The quiet work of the legal system happened in the background over the next few weeks, officially putting the house in my name, but the real healing happened within its walls. The cloud of anxiety that had been hanging over us for so long finally lifted. The kids started to laugh more freely. Matt's acceptance letter to Ohio State University arrived, and we tacked it to the fridge like a trophy. Angela started painting again, her canvases exploding with color. Wendy joined the school's debate team, channeling her fierce spirit into arguing about policy instead of defending her family. And Kevin was just happy. His soccer team won their local championship, and his smile lit up our entire world. I heard through Darlene what happened to Lorraine. Her glamorous life in Chicago, it turned out, was a house of cards built on credit cards and bad loans. She had been counting on the value of our parents' house to bail her out. Without it, her world collapsed. She lost the apartment, the car, everything. Last I heard, she was working a retail job 2 states away. There was no victory in hearing that. There was just a quiet sadness for the sister I once knew, the girl I'd shared a room with growing up. She hadn't just lost a lawsuit. She had lost her entire family, her past, and her home, all for a price tag. Looking at my children, now truly my children, I realized the house was never about the money. It was about having a place where we could be safe, a place to build a legacy of love, not leverage. That long, painful fight taught me things I never expected to learn. It taught me that justice isn't always loud like a gavel's crack. Sometimes it's the quiet, inevitable consequence of a person's own choices. Lorraine wasn't truly defeated in that courtroom. She was defeated the moment she chose a dollar amount over her own children. The court simply handed her the bill for a debt she had accrued over 10 long years. Her loneliness is the interest on a decade of selfishness. The experience also taught me the true definition of family. It's not about blood or birthright. Family is a verb. It's in the showing up, the staying up, the cleaning up. It's the fortress you build brick by brick with patience and sacrifice, a home fortified by love against the storms of the world. My real family was forged in the quiet moments, in the glow of a nightlight during a bad dream, in the cheers from the sidelines of a soccer game. In the thousands of ordinary days we simply chose to be there for each other. People sometimes ask me if I've forgiven her. That's a complicated question. I can't forgive the pain she inflicted on the children. That is their story to own. But for myself, I've chosen to let go of the anger. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't for the person who hurt you. It's for you. It's about refusing to let their poison live in your veins a moment longer. In the end, my sister chased the value of a house, while I fought for the value of a home. The greatest inheritance our parents ever gave me wasn't the property, it was the strength to understand the difference. If this story has touched you, please consider sharing it. You never know who might be fighting a silent battle of their own and needs to be reminded that they are not alone. Thank you for listening.